Yes, I'm going to talk about the media measurement gap, which is, I guess, this term we've coined to describe the differences between perhaps our expectations and reality when it comes to being able to measure our marketing investments. And yeah, talk through a few of the solutions and frameworks we have to help sort of close that gap and reset expectations and help us make good marketing decisions into the future. You may have seen this stat when you signed up to the event, but 75%, well actually more than that, 78.4% of all UK ad spend is now moving towards these digital formats. And, you know, we're in the economic climate we're in, and there's increased pressure to drive increasingly great ROI from those investments over time. So we've got these two sort of pressures: more competition, more ad spend is in these spaces. But we also have that pressure that we're actually also all trying to get the extra little bit of ROI that we can from these investments as well. So it's no wonder that there is more, I guess, scrutiny on where these marketing decisions and the ROI of our marketing investments lands. This is my AI-generated gap image. But yeah, when we think about marketing measurement, I'm going to start talking about attribution, digital attribution. We'll talk about some other types of measurement in a little while. But when we think about the promise of what marketing attribution should give us, it should give us absolute clarity, confidence. It should allow us to understand where sales have come from in the digital journey, and really sort of allow us to understand where to take that next investment to make the most of, you know, the next marginal pound or media budget available to us. So that's the promise, but the reality is that oftentimes if you look in all your advertising platforms, and this is exacerbated usually if you have a more complicated marketing mix, if you add up all of the sum totals from the different platforms, you'll frequently end up with more than 100% of your revenue, so you're certainly your digital revenue. And you find out that essentially every platform has had a bit of a hand in making that sale for you. So every platform's doing well for you. And ultimately, the challenge that leads to is obviously a lack of clarity and a bit of distrust, perhaps, in being able to use that information to make sound, solid investment decisions into the future. So what we want to be able to do is sort of close that gap and understand how can we improve the reality to get a little bit closer to that promise we need to make. As a result of some of the challenges of digital attribution, what we often see is that some channels are massively rewarded in terms of how they're attributed. So typically there'll be channels that are really close to the point of purchase, really easily trackable by the platforms. And yeah, as a consequence of that, they'll typically be attributed a lot of credit, even though perhaps in some cases some of those customers may have been coming to buy from you anyway. And we also see the exact opposite as well for other channels. So some channels might get under-attributed and their effects might be underreported. And typically what we see here is maybe they're a little bit further away from that point of purchase, a bit higher up the marketing funnel. And some of the challenges relating to that I'll go through right now. So over the last few years, no doubt if you've been close to web teams, marketing teams, privacy or compliance type discussions, you've probably made a few updates to your sites and particularly how cookies are handled and marketing consents and permissions tied into that conversation. Since 2017, we've seen changes in how first-party identifiers such as cookies, but also you might remember, it's commonplace now, but on your mobile apps, when you download and first install them, you'll be asked whether you can allow tracking or not. So that's the sort of device identifier level. Same thing's happening in cookies. Since 2017, the quality of that data has been essentially eroded a little bit. First of all, the data was just sort of missing, but since then, what we've seen is increasingly platforms are now inserting more modeled data to make up that shortfall. So we're working with slightly less quality data than we have been over the last certainly 10 years, and the five years since then have sort of degraded further. We also see a lot of advertising happening inside walled gardens, particularly social platforms, those networks that have mobile apps. And what's happening there essentially is when you load a browser, click through an ad or something like that, it loads in a particular way that's sort of isolated entirely from your other browsing history. So there's a bit of a challenge there of tying the two user journeys together, and digital attribution works essentially by following people who it can identify. So if it can't identify you as being the same person in two places, then previous activity is lost in the context of that current activity. And that's really similar to what I've got hopefully articulated reasonably well here, which is the duration that these identifiers last is falling and falling. So it used to be, well, you used to be able to set a cookie for like 500 odd days or so. And if you didn't ever clear your browser cache, then it would remember you essentially forever. And those of you who may have used, say, Google Ads many, many years ago would have been able to leverage that sort of information. These days, it's between 1 and 7 days, approximately. So if you're operating across different devices, different days of the week and different advertising platforms, then you can see how it's going to be really difficult for an attribution platform to essentially understand that the same user has made all of those interactions, because there's just no, the data just doesn't sort of join together in those sessions. So yeah, as a result of this is where we end up with this challenge. Like, every platform has its own individual information. It acts in a silo. You have to add it all together to achieve this sum that's way over 100%, and that's obviously leading to that distrust. You can just about see the 3 circles there overlapping, but I guess this is where we want to introduce, I guess, the modern approach to marketing measurement. Unfortunately, there is no one particular right answer to this, but there's certainly a good North Star to be aiming for, which we'll cover over the next few slides. The 3 aspects are attribution, incrementality testing, which we'll talk a lot about, and media mix modeling as well, or marketing mix modeling. Attribution is following users around and trying to stitch those sessions together, filling in the gaps of modeled data, but fundamentally it's an aggregation of all those individual touch points. Whereas incrementality testing and marketing mix modeling, these are more maths based. They're more studies to show if something has happened or if something has correlated over a period of time, then we can sort of determine that they've contributed to that. So I'll talk a little bit about attribution versus contribution. And it is a bit of a mindset shift, and we'll cover that shortly. Attribution is still a thing that our teams, your teams, everyone who's activating on Google Ads, or not just Google, sorry, any ads, is going to have to use every day, because essentially this is the information that's available to you in the platform for you to make your marketing decisions, particularly budget, targeting, campaign flighting, that sort of stuff. So, as much as we may love to say we need to shift over to this new way of thinking, and we do for large-scale budget decisions, when we're actually working on driving efficiency through platforms, there's still a job to be done by attribution, and it's for that reason there are still plenty of pieces of work you can do to improve this. Here we go. So I'm not going to cover any of these in too much detail now. There's a checklist on your desk actually, which you're more than welcome to take, and we've made an offer to run through anything one-on-one as well, if as a follow-up it's useful to you. The top aspect really talks about the marketing technology, which will allow you to increase the quality of the data that's coming through to your advertising platforms. There's kind of 3 general topics here. Quantity and quality of data are the top 2 really. And this is because some of that data fidelity and the granularity has been lost through all of the challenges I've just sort of talked through. And then the other aspect as well is around choosing attribution models as well that you're actually working with. Definitely, well, in fact, I'll ask the room if anyone is feeling confident enough to shout out. But would anyone mind sort of shouting out how they're running their marketing attribution currently? Won't put anyone on the spot if not. Fine. I was maybe being a bit too wishful thinking there. We've run some events like this before where a lot of people have shouted out that they're still using last click for a lot of reporting, because essentially, there's no shame in doing that, but essentially that's the way the company's always done it. And for that reason, the marketing, I guess, hierarchy relies on that type of information. But obviously the challenges are the channels that are closest to the point of conversion will always be the last click. So we'd always recommend adopting something a little bit more data-driven that takes into account as many of the touch points as you can track. And some of these technology aspects here will help plug the gaps in some of that missing data that I mentioned previously. The one thing that I would want to call out as almost like an action point or something to consider to take away from today, I've only got a couple of these, but the first one would be to consider adopting a server-side tagging method. You might hear it called conversion API or CAPI, not like the animal, but the reason for this is, and this graph shows, oh, there we go. This graph shows that a lot of the tracking information that you could be sending to these platforms to help with your attribution information is going to currently be being missed. And through implementing this with a compliant consent banner and all of that good stuff, you'll be able to send additional legitimate data to your advertising platforms. And the effect of that is it uses less model data and more real data. And obviously that's what we want, because we can use that to build audiences and we can use it to inform our marketing attribution a lot more efficiently. And there's various platforms on the web that you can use to do this. We use one called Stape. There's other options are available, obviously. And your agency or we or anyone else can support on this, and there's numerous ways of deploying it. But this is really key in closing that gap between the data you think you're going to have versus what you get. So it's part of closing that gap. Cool, so going back to the trio, as I said, I won't talk about attribution much more than this today. I think Greg's going to run through a couple of examples of comparing the two. But what I'm going to talk a little bit next about is contribution, which is looking at the statistics side of things. On incrementality testing, this is measuring essentially the causal effect of doing something or not doing something against a controlled, in a controlled experiment against a control group. So you can sort of be very certain to a really high level that the thing you're doing or not doing is actually causing the sales, lack of sales. And then, as I said, the marketing mix modeling is then the longer term correlational studies to sort of understand, well, every time we do this type of activity, 2 weeks later, we always see a surge in sales. And we've done that a couple of times now over the last few years. And as a result, we can sort of understand the effect and the delay and the efficiency of those pieces of activity. So yeah, another solution really is required to sort of challenge the attribution thinking. And it is a big shift. And as I say, some marketing organizations are built around this context. This clicker's really getting me. Cool. So when it comes to thinking about marketing measurement, I guess in an attribution world, if you see an ad or click an ad, it will count as a touch point in that multi-touch attribution, and the platform will essentially get some credit. And in a data-driven attribution model, it'll get a fractional credit, but it'll still get some credit. The challenge we have is that a business will have a baseline of sales. So if you stopped all of your marketing activity today, you will still make some sales tomorrow. Maybe not as many, because clearly we all hope your marketing is doing something for you, but there is also a baseline of sales. So when we see the sum total of all your attribution being 100% or more, we obviously, because it's more than 100%, we instinctively know it's wrong anyway, but because it's even close to 100%, we should also know it's instinctively wrong, because there are other things outside of digital performance that drive sales for essentially every business out there. We also have different dynamics of the works that's happening. So we talked a little bit about how attribution has certain timelines it can work on. And some of the technology solutions can allow you to extend that by sending customer data and by using platforms that customers are signed in on and all that sort of stuff. But some marketing tactics only really have short-term effects. Typically those relate to sales or those at the point of purchase, among others. Whereas some marketing tactics mostly only have longer term effects. So this might be messaging around value propositions and just general brand awareness type activity. There's a massive debate around performance versus brand. And I'm happy to have it on the tables, but not now. Typically you see two types of activity. The longer term stuff generally also does contribute to short term sales, because there's always a little part of your market that's in market to buy. But clearly some of these things may take multiple exposures over a period of time to actually display that ROI. Some tactics are unfortunately just ineffective, and I've got a great case study on this coming up in a second, and hopefully I'll get a bit more audience participation for that one. Platforms also, or activity also has a diminishing value, so spending the first 10K might get a great ROI, the next 10K maybe a moderate ROI, but at some point that's going to level off, and once you're saturating that audience, spending more money isn't necessarily going to drive more sales. And there's also all this other stuff going on as well in your business. So you might have pricing, promotions, You might have a physical availability issue, be that stores or stock or something else. And there's plenty of other factors going on, like the economy and all these externalities. So attribution essentially can't be the be all and end all, because attribution essentially isn't aware of most of the things on the screen right now. And we see this coming through, and there's a few models to explain this. We particularly like this one. It's referred to as the performance plateau or ramp and bump model by a few econometricians in the market. And what we essentially see is this diminishing return, where if you are only invested in, say, performance marketing really close to the point of purchase, and you keep growing and that fuels business growth for a while, at some point, that mixture of marketing effort and investment is only going to get you so far, and you will plateau because you're only talking to the part of your market that's in audience at that time or on that platform at that time. And that's where being able to do other types of marketing activity, so maybe speaking to people who could be customers or you hope will be future customers, comes in. The challenge there, though, is if you can't measure this ramp and slope very well, and if you don't have a good feeling for where that inefficiency is going to come in, then going back to the very beginning that Lydia introduced, you won't necessarily have the confidence or sign off to actually make that leap to continue to invest and to diversify your marketing mix. I won't read all this right now, but essentially what I wanted to call out is the shift in mindset from attribution to contribution is a reasonably large one, and it will come at the right time for every business individually. But by looking at the contribution, so testing and MMMs essentially, this is like a platform agnostic way. If you look at the sum total of a marketing mix model, 100% of that is 100% of your business sales. It will explain everything that's happened, not only just through media channels and investments, but also your baseline, what effect your price promotion had, what effect your physical availability had on your sales, and all that good stuff too. It uses statistics as opposed to trying to follow people around the internet, which, as we've discussed, is really hard to do these days and a bit creepy, but yeah. It also allows you to understand effects, delays, effects, all that sort of stuff as well. Cool, I'm just going to run through incrementality testing and marketing mix modeling, and then I guess the lecture part of this is over, but I'm really keen to hear some questions. So looking at incrementality testing, in a business, let's say on any particular time period, 3 sales were made, or maybe 3,000 sales, whatever it might need to be. If you look in your digital attribution platform, that might be an ads platform or Google Analytics or something sat in the center, you might see, say, 2 of those, because some of these sales happen elsewhere, might be in store or through the phone or something like that. But your attribution platform will pick up a proportion of those. And this clearly means that they were exposed to digital advertising. On the far side, what we've got here then is the notion of, I guess, incremental conversions. And what we're trying to show here is the asterisk here and here represents the sales essentially that would have happened anyway in the absence of marketing. And the way that we can calculate, particularly the gap between these two and this one here, is by running controlled experiments. Typically these look like this. So we'll take any geography, so it might be sort of regions of the UK, it might be county level or TV region level, something like that. And we can essentially look at withholding or perhaps increasing or slightly decreasing investment in one of those areas. We take all of the other areas' information and form a weighted average, a synthetic control, keep that up to date with any factors that are happening. So if weather's a factor, if payday's a factor, if any of those things are factors, the A and B in the test are both affected equally. And we look at the difference, and we basically forecast what should happen in the test region and compare it to what actually happened based on everything else being equal. And that gives us, within a confidence interval, it gives us this notion of an incremental uplift that the advertising has caused, or if you withhold it, has not caused. We've done some of these. Just wait for this clicker. So we've run obviously plenty of these tests. The one I wanted to call out, which I think is the next slide, is here we go, a pure brand search test. So this business is direct to consumer. It's a parts repair business. And they, at the time, were bidding on their brand keyword. At the time, they had an almost undetectable amount of competition on their brand keyword. So clearly different situations might make for a different test. But in this case, they were bidding on the keyword, but no one else was, essentially. So we essentially had this hypothesis that essentially, if we were not to bid on that keyword and sort of pay, in this case, Google and Microsoft, for the luxury of a tagged up click rather than an organic click, that we'd be able to essentially reinvest that fund elsewhere. And the business was expanding internationally at the time, still is, and we wanted to basically understand whether or not that investment could be placed elsewhere. What we were able to do is a regional geographic withhold of some of the, well, of all of the brand keywords at the time. And we forecasted what should happen in that region based on a weighted average. And we're basically able to demonstrate that the stats is essentially that the red line stays in the blue area. So that's good. That's what we wanted to see. The blue areas are expected results. So in the absence of ads, we still got the same results we were expecting for this business. Over the year, it represents about 90 grand, and we're able to invest that elsewhere. But the question is, in the ads platforms, what do you think the attributed ROAS or ROI essentially of that campaign would have been? I will hold until someone gives me an answer this time, even if it's someone from Impression.
About 5 times.
5? It's higher?
Yes.
Yeah, 10.6. So 10.6. So this just shows, I guess, like almost, it's a perfect case in point because brand is probably the least contested, but it was the one that gave me the most obvious case study. But it just goes to show that what appears in your attribution platform isn't necessarily what's actually impacting the business. And it may have been actually the other way around if we looked at an advertising effort that was trying to attract a new audience as opposed to one that was just about to buy, where we're paying anyway, which was this one. Hope that's some food for thought. So marketing mix modeling is the other aspect of contribution analysis when it comes to marketing measurement. I definitely would want to, I guess for the uninitiated, would definitely recommend thinking about incrementality testing above marketing mix modeling to begin with, because this takes more data and effort over a longer period of time and actually can be made better through having existing tests anyway, because the tests can train the model more effectively. So testing is definitely where I would start after the attribution aspects we talked about earlier, so the checklist and in particular the server-side tagging piece of work. But some of the great things about marketing mix modeling is that it can consider a huge variety of variables. So not just your digital media variables, but also other marketing variables and also other context as well. So this is where I talked about seasonality, competition, pricing, that sort of stuff. But also if you're doing, let's say, direct mail or print, press, broadcast, all that sort of stuff that's not bought digitally, that information can be taken into account as well. And essentially all of this information becomes a massive time series of information, say weekly. We understand each of these variables, how much was spent or how many assumed eyeballs saw that ad at that time. There's a bit of maths in the middle, a bit of machine learning, and what it can create essentially is a decomposition of your actual business sales. So this will never go higher than your actual sales, but it will break it down and explain what's caused those sales or what's likely to have caused those sales. And you get confidence intervals back out of it as well. So if something's not sure, you know to test it and you can build on it from there. But what this allows you to do is extrapolate the baseline. So in this case, the base was, this is a real example, the base was, I think it was like 60% odd. So in the absence of marketing, they could expect to continue to get 60% for a while, and that would diminish obviously with the long-term effects sort of falling away. But they could see that actually their investment in marketing was driving the top 40%, not 100% of all the sales, which is part of that mindset shift. In a case study here, it's a sports equipment retailer. We were able to look at, I think it was these channels of investment, Google, TikTok, a few social platforms. We also looked at retail selling price as like a pricing factor, a few inflation factors and a few other bits and bobs as well. And we were able to sort of model out, I don't think it was the same case study, but the graph would look similar. This one's been spruced up for the slides. But it looks something like that. And we were able to break down where the traffic's so the sales are likely to have come from. And the really neat thing about marketing mix modeling, and this is where it gets into the realms of media planning, is that once we understand how each channel behaves, and you get some of this obviously through the testing as well, but you get it for every channel through doing marketing mix modeling, even channels you can't test like TV, for example, or maybe like magazines, national magazines. You get the contribution for each of them, and you understand the dynamics, the diminishing marginal returns, and the delayed effects and all that sort of stuff, so that you can then basically put together a forecast scenario. Two ways of doing that. One, fix your budget and just optimize what you have. That's what we did here. So a lot of the actions and recommendations were taken, but the theoretical maximum of what a reorganization of that media plan could have achieved is approximately 20% uplift in sales just through spending in a smarter way. I think that's a great example. It's probably also on the top end of a good example. That's why I made the deck. But yeah, that's a sort of example of sort of making the most of a fixed budget. But the other way you can look at this is saying, well, actually, if budget increased by 20%, where should my next 20% of budget actually go? And it will distribute it between the recommended channels based on the ROIs and how far along that efficiency curve you are for each channel as well. Obviously, all these measurement tactics are not created equally, like not at all. Time to action and cost, and just the privacy aspects, and yeah, there's all these different metrics basically that sort of break down which channel is best. I think we've got attribution in red, so definitely the lower cost and one of the most granular methods of measurement. And then you see on basically the opposite side of things, it's marketing mix modeling, so the highest of costs and the least granular, because marketing mix modeling is essentially just looking at the channel. Attribution's really trying to look at that individual user, and we find the truth in between. I think Greg's going to talk a little bit about how we can actually put some of the learnings from incrementality testing or marketing mix modeling, once we understand the actual contribution rather than the attribution, how we can put that into practice through multipliers. So yeah, I guess it's not just us saying it. Really like this piece from the Harvard Business Review. Obviously, plenty of other articles have come out to sort of discuss this topic a lot as well. But between experiments, i.e. incrementality testing, and marketing mix modeling, really is the gold standard. And as I said earlier, it should be the North Star. But stepping from attribution into testing is realistically the most approachable aspect of that. But yeah, in this data-constrained world, cookies, device, and platform advertising, and delays between and device switching and consumer behavior that I covered earlier, in that data-constrained online world, that is essentially the gold standard we should be aiming for. It's not doing it again, is it? So yeah, putting it all together, there is a bit of a journey, and as I said, there is this North Star. I'll whiz forward to it, where essentially you have a marketing mix model that can be refined. But along the way, what you want to be looking at is making sure your ad attribution is as good as it can be. You're filling the data gaps and you're making the quality of that data better where possible. And you're starting to introduce a little bit of experimentation. And it kind of goes up from there. You can always run new tests and you can always refresh marketing mix models. None of these things have to be one-offs, but you might not necessarily want to be investing in them constantly all the time. And yeah, what does good look like in the short term? Appreciate the content I've just ran through is maybe a little bit on the academic side of things. Hopefully some of the examples coming up will sort of change that a little bit. But I wanted to leave a couple of takeaways from this first section. On the attribution side of things, I really recommend just making sure you're feeling confident with the data that you are feeding the platforms, because the more higher quality data you feed them, the better the outcomes are likely to be, particularly on the measurement side of things, but you also get the added benefit of sending more data for audience generation as well. So retargeting, lookalikes, that sort of stuff all improves through some of the server technologies as well. And if you don't have that server-side technology, I'd definitely recommend it. And as I said, there's plenty of platforms out there I'm sure your existing partners or a new partner can support with that as well if that's appropriate. If you want to talk to us about that, I'm happy to connect with our team as well to run a quick audit, a few recommendations, just to make sure you're feeling confident that, I guess, what you've learned from today and taken from our materials is a correct sort of route forward. On the contribution side of things, as I said, the marketing mix modelling perhaps isn't the first thing to dive in on, but if you're already doing that, then that's fantastic and definitely a worthy investment, and I'm sure you've already been seeing some of the benefits from that. But taking one step back from that, looking at running incrementality tests, particularly where perhaps you or someone in your team has the largest uncertainty, that's probably the most impactful thing you can do. So that might look like your next big investment, or it might look like bidding on pure brand if you don't have much competition, or it could be launching into an increased period of spend for an upcoming sale period or something like that, just to set a few ideas. And then take forward an understanding of how to work with that knowledge. So once you, and Greg's going to hopefully fill in a few more of these bits for me, but once you understand what the incremental ROI is from an activity, understand how to sort of rationalize that against what you see in the dashboard, because as you saw from the example, sometimes attribution can over and sometimes attribution can under attribute what's actually happening. I think that might be me. Yeah, cool. If there's any pressing questions, I'll take one or two, but otherwise I might let Greg dive straight in. Sure.
What sort of time period would you measure over in order to get the kind of results that you talked about there?
So
ongoing, or can you do it over just like a fixed period?
So for a test, I think some of the examples we had were like 6, 8, 10 weeks, something like that. It depends how bold the test is. So you could test just a small reduction or a small increase in spend, which will take a little bit longer because the uncertainty involved in that. Whereas if you were feeling confident enough to maybe switch off or switch on a whole region and do the opposite elsewhere, then you're likely to achieve a result a little bit sooner on the earlier side of that. When we look at longer term correlation studies for the marketing mix modelling, you definitely want a few years worth of information. So you want to be able to pick up on those seasonal and sale trends over a period of time. So it's always quite fun to look back and understand what offline or what other partnership or sales activity was happening 18 months ago. So we're always looking forward, obviously. But all the digital platforms go back that far, obviously. So it's just a case of filling in some of those gaps.
In one of your slides, it was like some remark about AI attribution platforms, and what I got from this was know that we can trust them. So can you tell us more why?
It's not our preference, but it will depend on your individual case. So if your marketing mix isn't too complicated, or if perhaps you don't have some of that historical data to rely on because the business is a new entity or something like that, then in those cases it can be a good option. Whereas if you have quite a complicated mix where a lot of information is maybe offline, not in some of these digital platforms, then some of the online platforms won't know about the information. So they won't be able to detect the effect from them, if that makes sense.
So to some level, you actually can try them, but if it becomes more complicated with offline data, if we call that stuff, without historical data from your company, then there is not this.
Yeah, that's certainly our opinion. There's plenty of opinions in the market, and there's plenty of platforms, and some of them are doing really, really well. And they work in different ways. So some paths stitch together, so they'll try to understand different touch points and assume that they're the same person. Some will use modelling to fill in gaps of the platforms they're connected to, and I'm sure there's other ways as well. But yeah, I guess our approach is to go on the transparent data science side of things, so it's just a bit more uncovered. Although I do know, and Chris is here now from Snap, I do know Snap have some great partnerships with different online platforms as well. So your mileage may vary depending on your individual business scenario, but it's our preference to go down the data route, just because it's more transparent from our point of view.